It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, here we are back with your Real Estate Property Podcast and the Australian property market, streaming right now on Spotify and iHeartRadio, breaking down all of the major real estate markets from Adelaide to Canberra and to the far north of Queensland, and we'll be going there in just a moment. Now, if you want to get in touch, you've got two options. The first, you can leave a recorded message, super easy. The link is below. And the second way is our trusty email address, myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Well, it's a Monday. The weekend is come and gone, March the 9th, and Australia's final pockets of true housing affordability are disappearing, and disappearing fast. Not long ago, there were at least 10 capital city suburbs where you could still buy a house for under 500 grand. Today, Domain tells us that the number has shrunk to just 5. Those last lower-priced suburbs are being discovered, and discovered quickly, and once demand arrives, prices tend to move much faster than people expect. The remaining sub-$500,000 suburbs are scattered across the country. 3 are in Tasmania. Good morning if you are listening to us from Tasmania this morning. Those 3 suburbs are New Norfolk, Primrose Sands and Risdon Vale. Russell Island in Queensland is there, and as well as Berrimah, which is in Darwin. That is rounding off the list, showing just how limited affordability options have become throughout Australia. So let's take you right now to Darwin, where we're catching up with Stewie and Danny. They are from Smart Real Estate, and a very good morning. First, we'll come to you, Stewie. I'll get you to just sort of break that down, like Berrimah is on this list of remaining sub 500k. Boy, oh boy, have you seen the prices rise where you are in the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, we have, after probably one of the more brutal bear markets for any of the capital cities in Australia, our market has really sprung to life kind of 18 to 24 months ago, with a lot of the freestanding houses, pulling anywhere from kind of 30 to 60% gains in the last couple of years.
So tell us a little bit about Berrimah. Why is this area still in that price category?
It's a relatively new area, I suppose, Berrimah, that was opened up to that residential development maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and is still quite keenly priced. It's still fairly central to both Darwin's northern suburbs and Palmerston. And while prices have risen there, there's still some great buying opportunities.
Danny, let's come to you, because that's Berrimah, but I'm sure that there are a couple of other suburbs in Darwin that you want to talk to and perhaps give a little bit of a green light to those listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are still pockets in Darwin, including suburbs like Coconut Grove, which is looking at a median price for 2-bedroom units at $450 and pulling in a decent rental yield. You've also got Milner as well. And there's quite a few pockets still in Palmerston, which is, the neighbouring city of Darwin, even though it's only 8 kilometres away.
And just in terms of the prices around that 500k, how busy is it at the moment?
Very, very busy. So, a lot of the investors are now getting priced out of the house market because the prices have just soared up so quick in just a short space of time. They're now pivoting to the unit sector. And the unit sector has had a considerable growth in 12 months already. Majority of the purchases from the investors had been focused on housing, but now it's the units that still provide a really high rental yield and that sub 500 mark.
Yeah, let's come back to you there, Stewie, because I know that you want to talk about that, those houses that have grown crazy, I think is the best way to say it. And as Danny says, the investors are getting stuck right into that unit market. We're seeing that replicated right around the country, but it is particularly frenzied at the moment where you are.
Yeah, no, exactly right. We've definitely seen freestanding houses have that exponential growth. In some examples, you can find on realestate.com properties that have actually doubled in value, that have transacted for, say, 350,000 and recently resold for 700. So some huge capital growth there in the houses. And the unit sector have lagged the freestanding houses due to some oversupply there, which has now really been chewed up, and investors pivoting, very, very strongly with a lot of buying energy, particularly with those sub $500,000 units that still represent really strong rental yields and lots of opportunity for capital growth.
With those investors that maybe came into Darwin 2-3 years ago, you're now seeing those investors, they're still retaining what they have bought, but they're pivoting away to markets like Melbourne, which we've been talking about over the last 7 days in terms of value.
Exactly right. There are still what I call a retail investor, particularly from the eastern seaboard, still seeing really good value in the freestanding houses in Darwin. And there are still some really, really good buying opportunities there. But certainly what we're noticing in the market, once a property pushes up to that 750 or 800,000, some of the investors are telling us, listen, we see more opportunity for capital growth at that price level from purchasing in a bigger market like Melbourne, where, it really has been beaten up by political overreach, land taxes, etc. But I think that bigger, high volume market does have the capacity to, have more capital growth at a property at that level. I think if you're buying in Victoria for 750 or 800,000, you have that real chance that property is going to go up to 1.2, 1.3 million. Could you say the same for a Darwin property? I'm not sure. I'd like to think so, but I think, if you compare the two at that price level, maybe Victoria does offer better opportunity for capital growth without the rental yields that we do see in Darwin. There's no doubt that Darwin rental yields historically and at the moment perform much better than the southern states, but potentially without as much capital growth there.
We are talking to Stewie and Danny. They are selling us the dream in Darwin, especially on price point. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, I'm looking seriously at Darwin. I want to rent first. What is the rental market doing in Darwin? We'll check in on that after this.
Decode the property market with insider knowledge and insights to better navigate your real estate journey. Every week, we present so much real estate.
I loved how you have to think on your feet. It's a quick process, but you become quite close to the people and they trust you. So it's important that you are a trustworthy person and you work with the agent.
Powerful, up-to-date news every morning from 6 a.m.
So more than 57,000 people have moved to the ACT in the last 5 years. And that's really proving a strong driver for our housing market and for land sales, unit and apartment sales.
The interest rate cycle changed quite quickly and quite ferociously. So to see the values come down as quickly as it has is stark contrast to where we were, not only 12 months, 18 months ago.
And Berwick always has a growth every couple of years substantially.
I mean, that's the thing. I think everyone knows, especially if you're an investor and you've had a bad experience before, that a good property manager can make or break that investment.
While we can't predict the future of the real estate market, we can provide insights on what's currently trending. It's powerful information at your fingertips. It's the Real Estate Podcast, talking properties from 6 a.m. every day from every corner of the Australian real estate market.
And it's a Real Estate Monday. We've got Stewie and Danny with us. Let me come to you, Danny, because I want to talk about the problem that these areas face. I mentioned it at the top. When people sort of discover it, and we're illuminating this area of Berrimah, suddenly people get the phone calls, they get the transactions happening, and people that are living in Berrimah, and apologies to you if you are listening in Berrimah. I know you don't want this podcast out there. It's just a fact of life though, isn't it? When people find out, suddenly people move in.
Absolutely. It becomes a feeding frenzy and the phone just doesn't stop going. Demand is super high, especially when the news gets caught. Darwin's a small place. It moves like wildfire. Everyone's onto it.
Yeah, so people might be looking at moving to Darwin. They want to rent. The rental crisis, it's right across the country. Many tenants are absolutely exhausted after years of rising rents and intense competition. Plenty of competition in 2026. Instead of continuing to rent, they're targeting the last affordable suburbs, though, where buying may actually cost less than staying in the rental market. Are there signs of that, Stewie, where people are in your market are saying, I got to get into buying a property here because rents are just becoming unaffordable?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's probably 30-40% of our local buyers, that we're chatting to at open inspections are looking at getting out of the rental trap. It really is basic math where, they can essentially purchase a property and the mortgage payments and holding costs are less than what it would be to rent a property. And in our rapidly rising market, obviously rents are closely tied with sale prices. Rents are going up quite a bit year on year. So those people that can afford to do it are definitely looking to opt out of the rental game. And we have recently seen the government now increase the first home buyer cap, which was at 600, and at July 1 it now moves north to 750, which should help some more people get out of that rental trap.
What's been one of the main things that you have noticed in 2026 there in Darwin we've covered some of it with what you've talked about, but what else has sort of been evolving for your market?
Yeah, listen, it's a great question. Once again, that trend with investors really strongly surging into the unit sector of the market. We're also really seeing, I think, perceptions of value change with our owner-occupier buyers. We are getting some really, really strong prices in both Palmerston and Darwin greater regions from our local buyers who, in previous years were probably hesitant to make offers and bids at the kind of level we're seeing them happy to move forward in today's market.
Well, it's the first time for this year that we have talked about Darwin. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but hey, you've got one on the board and it's with you, Stewie. So thanks so much to you and Danny for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast. Appreciate it, fellas.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you.
Stay ahead of the competition with the latest news, insights and data analysis on the property podcast that keeps you informed.
Every time we see a first homeowner coming through, they've got mum and dad next to them helping out with deposits or on the actual title itself, because in your 25 to 30, you might be on $100,000. That's not going to get you, much of an apartment if you're looking in the inner city.
We heard 3 more loud explosions, which obviously is pointing to the fact that it isn't over. And, we've got these to contend with. Hopefully we won't see any more, but it's a very worrying time at the moment, Craig.
And you wanted to make comment about changing the capital gains discount or threshold and what effect that is likely to have on the Perth property market.
Yeah, and I think just harking back to that earlier comment around, any small changes that you make, and I think you've just got to be very careful where changes are made, and would sort of caution governments of all persuasions to be very, very cautious when it comes to tinkering with taxation settings.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.